Alright, welcome to video 4 of the series on using Google Earth for your farm or the land that you're working with. My name is Steve Gabriel and I'm happy to share this video. So in the first video we talked about basic navigation. Second one we talked about things you can draw using the tools in Google Earth. And the third video we talked about data that you can import from other websites into Google Earth. So this last one I'm just going to show you a couple of ways that we've used this to plan our farm, some ways that we found this tool to be really useful as we think about our site. So here's our basics of the land that we're managing contiguously. So this is both land that we lease as well as own. It's about 20 acres that we have title to down here, and then another 30 or so that we graze for our neighbors. So it's useful just to have some sense of our landscape. Some of the things we did early on is we mapped, using the polygon tool, some of our dominant vegetation. So we haven't done it for all of our site, but we've mapped here the forest stands. For us, this is cataloging areas of similar vegetation, making a polygon, and then prescribing different management. And this has been really useful for us to keep some records, think about this as we do our winter planning, and also to work with consulting foresters as we think about how to manage our forested land. And so again, in each of these, we've just named them at this point. We could go in here and do our right click, get info. We could do a grader calculation. We could say that in this stand there's white pine and Scots pine and that sort of thing, and like really get detailed, right, and start to take some notes and put our management strategy right in here. And I've actually built maps for other clients where we import and build their entire forest management plan in here rather than in that big thick packet of paper. And again, when I click on that, it'll start to pop up that information if I've entered anything in the description. So in addition to that, what we did is we mapped our pasture patches. We looked at our pasture and we gave every area a grade of green means great, yellow means moderate, and red means poor. And so we were able to think about different areas that we're grazing and how we might want to manipulate and manage them and regenerate them if they're really poor in terms of their quality. So these basic tools can be useful, and every year we revisit these. We look at these different forest stands, we look at our pasture patches. Maybe we've improved some of these and we can now move on to another area. But it helps us set up some planning and gives us some general idea of what we're after. So on the most basic level, that's been useful for us. We've talked about sort of contour data. We've used this in our planning process to, for instance, dig these swales that are here. So here's a pond that we ended up digging here on the site. When we dug that pond, we actually sited it and then drew it on here, and we were able to estimate the volume and the size of it, which was helpful. And then we had an overflow swale here that we worked with this contour line to sort of figure out the general direction and also the length of the swale. So the swale kind of comes out of the pond here and runs this way. And you can see it's not exactly mimicking these contours. It's pretty close. But again, as I mentioned in the previous video, the contours aren't perfectly situated. And so we do some planning on here, and then we ground truth it before we start digging or doing any of that stuff. So here's the swale that we dug. I'm going to make it green just so it's a little more clear, make it a little thicker. And when we did the planning on here, what was nice is we could go into this and we could look at the measurement data and, for instance, calculate how long this was going to be. It's 327 feet, and then how many trees we would need to order in order to plant up that berm once we did it, and how much. We also were able to estimate based on the length and the average width of the berm how much cover crop seed we needed to order. Right. So just some basic ways that we can plan using this tool, and in combination with the contour map and some drawing tools, we were able to do that. Alright, let's turn those things off for now. We did a basic observation of our site, and we started to map out the hydrology. So this is just an example of areas that we identified. I'm going to take these polygons off for now. So we just looked at and walked our property and looked where there were main drainages. This is actually an old ditch that's now kind of turned into a drainage area. We found this old area which really kind of wants to be a wetland. On our farm we have this lower stream. We have these different wet spots in our pasture, right? And so it's useful to make this kind of data layer. Here's the overflow from this pond, which is a ditch along the north border of the property. And so we look at these things, and we might look at them in tandem with something like our pasture map, right? Where we look at this area where we have really poor quality pasture and also a wet spot, or this area over here, or how some of our pasture areas might intersect with some swales and things like that. So, by building all these layers, we can always kind of revisit and look at the relationship between different things. When we looked at digging these swales, we also thought about how we were going to deal with our maps and our grazing as we worked through. We also mapped access. So we, if I take off I'll just take off the boundaries here. This is a simplified version of the map we made, but we did map also in orange here is everywhere that we wanted to drive our vehicles, our tractors and our trucks, versus this is a future trail that we haven't put in yet. We also in the past have zoomed in further and mapped areas that we want to be able to get a cart or a wheelbarrow versus areas that we want to just walk. And so by mapping these different kind of access and circulation points, it helps us when we start to plan swales or tree plantings or paddocks or permanent fencing or infrastructure to really think about these kind of different things. We're making a loop trail. We have some agritourism at our farm, and we were actually able to map out this loop trail. Not this one here, it's a different one, and measure how long that was going to be, and then we can advertise that on our website, that sort of thing. Probably one of the bigger things that really we benefited from using Google Earth was when we created our grazing plan. And let's just turn off the map here. So here's our grazing plan. At first, when we were trying to figure it out, we did all the math and all the calculations to figure out that we, on average, wanted to create half-acre paddocks. And so we would start in a field using the measure tool and using the polygon, and we would just draw out a paddock and try to make it about a half-acre. So there's a half-acre paddock there, right? And then we would just say, okay, great, we're going to save that. That's one. And then we go back and we'd start again, and we'd measure our next paddock and make that next half-acre as we went along, right? And so, and then as you go into, all the details here, once you start to draw your paddocks, you can also go in and kind of shift them and manipulate them. So if I didn't like, one of the paddocks we have over here, I can simply access it, and by clicking on it, it'll take me to the right folder and to the right polygon. Let's see, which one is it? That's number 5. All right, so if I click on information, I do my right click, I can actually manipulate the size of this polygon by dragging the points and changing different. Maybe I want to run my fence that way instead or something like that. Okay. Look at my measurements. Is that going to change the area, right? Is it still, no, it's not really a half-acre anymore, so now I need to kind of tweak things if that's what's important to me, right? So we use this every year, and basically what we found over time is that we create an initial grazing plan, and then in the winter we usually edit it based on some things that we learned or some trees that we planted or something that we did to kind of change the plan. But it's a nice thing to reference, and one of the things we haven't done that I know other growers do is they sometimes actually keep their grazing records right in the plan here. So you could click on, this is paddock 15, you could again right click on it, and if I said that in paddock, in this paddock here, cows in on May 5th of 18 or 19, and then cows out on May 6th. Right, I could just take simple notes in here, and then they didn't come back till August or September, let's say. So I could just take these notes really simply in here. Oops, and I actually accidentally made a folder. I meant to put those in. Here, let's put those in our right paddock here. That was a mistake. So paddock 15. I'm going to add it to the dialog box in there, and now at the end of the season when we go back we can just click on 15 and it actually will tell us in paddock 15 when the cows went out, when they went in, and all those, any other notes, maybe when we clipped it, when we mowed it, if we added seed. So it can actually be a really good record keeping tool. It's not something we've used. We use a grazing chart, but you could use it in that way. So you could use it for planning, or you could also use it for record keeping. So that's really great. And then finally, another example of how we've used this really effectively, we're going to go down the road to our friends who we rent from, and we tap trees on their farm. Let's see, let's go down the road here. So down the road to our leased area. When we made a contract with them, it was really important to articulate in the contract how much land. I'm going to shift our perspective here because you'll see why in a second. So this forested area is what we're interested in. They own a bunch of this farmland, but we were interested in tapping some trees. It had good road access. So in our lease, it was really important to articulate the area that we were going to lease from them. So we identified these areas as our main areas that we wanted to tap. And we could calculate the size of those and a payment proportionally to them. We also wanted to map on here the areas that we might access these sugar bushes from and have any conversations with them about, you know, driving across the field or wet conditions, that sort of thing. And so we were able to give them a map and then include that in the lease with the area that we were leasing and any kind of major points of contention that could arise early on. So it was really helpful for us to be able to make a simple map. When it actually came time to tap trees, what we did is we took a GPS unit, which is something that is a separate device where we can go out into the field and it'll reference satellites and it'll actually take readings and plot points in real time on the ground. And then you can take that data and you can import it into Google Earth and you can map that. And so what we did is we just went out with our GPS and we mapped every single tree that we could find that was a good maple tree. So that's what this looks like. And with maple production, what's really helpful is this now creates a pattern for us to then decide how we're going to lay out our lines between the sort of interface of where the trees are laid out and the slope itself. So this property basically slopes down like this, which you'll see. Let's see, if we turn on our terrain layer, you'll be able to see really dramatically how it kind of slopes, right? So it gives us a sense of what that looks like. So we can think about elevation drop and things like that, and distance, which is really important with maple because we're actually calculating vacuum in the line and different changes and how we might lay it out to be most efficient for. This is basically a natural vacuum gravity system with 3/16 tubing. And so all the kind of data that's in here really helps us plan out that system. And then we actually drew the lines on there. So here's our lines that we first proposed that we would install, and we have installed on this farmland. Let me just turn off the terrain feature for a second. Whoops. Go back here. And so you can see, the end result is the lines, and we could then calculate a measurement for the distance for each of these lines and put in our tubing order from the company. And we were within about 40 feet of our estimate, which is really great. I wouldn't have a good way to map this, to design the lines, and then to order our tubing without kind of guesstimating what I thought. So Google Earth's been really helpful, and so this is kind of a combination of using the drawing tools as well as data from a GPS unit in order to plan the farm. So that's it for the series. Hopefully that's been helpful. Feel free to reach out with questions, and I'll answer them as best I can. My email is stevegabrielfarmer@gmail.com. And I appreciate you tuning in. If you haven't seen the other videos, there's 3 others in the series. And happy Google Earthing.